everyone, and welcome to the Inform Series, episode 14. With this series, AAGT continues to bring the latest topics in gifted education to you to help you better respond to the learning differences of your gifted children. We are thrilled today to welcome Alisa Johnson to the Inform Series to help us better understand culturally responsive teaching. Alisa was a popular presenter at the AAGT 2021 conference. Now, this session is being recorded. When it's over, you can click on the end of the session to be able to get your hours, is that what that says? Anyway, to be able to get your continuing ed hours, if you would like to. Also, if you would like to ask questions and engage in the chat, go ahead and do that. We're going to let Alisa have a presentation ahead of time to give you some information, and then we'll be sharing those questions after that. So, to get us started, I wanted to share why this topic is so important to our students in gifted education in Arizona. In a recent report released by the University of Purdue, underrepresentation of gifted programs and services exists for American Indian, Black, and Latinx youth in our state. The recommendation is that reform is warranted with respect to access, equity, policy, procedures, and how students are identified. Inequities in identification of and services to our students of color, students from poverty, English language learners, females, twice exceptional learners, and other underrepresented groups reflect a problem in gifted education our community has struggled with for many years. The National Association for Gifted Children and Arizona Association for Gifted and Talented support the permanent reversal of practices and policies that limit the inclusion in gifted programs and services. Culturally responsive teaching connects students' cultures, language, and life experiences with what they learn in school. Learning occurs more rapidly and efficiently when we are able to make connections in our brain with what we already know. Life experiences and background knowledge gained as a child grows and develops, create hooks on which we can attach new concepts and skills. For students who come to us from diverse backgrounds, life experience and background knowledge is often overlooked. Educators miss a great opportunity to use them to support learning. Culturally responsive teaching bridges the gap between the teacher and the student as a result of understanding the cultural nuances that may otherwise hinder the potential for students to thrive. As a teacher of the gifted and a culturally responsive teaching professional development provider, Alisa brings her life experiences and background knowledge to help us navigate strategies for developing culturally responsive classrooms. We welcome you, Alisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, and it is such an honor and a pleasure to be with you to share, my passion. I think that what Donna says is absolutely true. Students, all students, really. Our focus is on students from minority communities and from marginalized communities. We want to focus on that, but we do, including myself, we do bring our life experiences. And so what we're going to talk about today is really how teachers can relationships with families and understand life experiences and bring those into the classroom as part of building a culturally diverse, dynamic environment, as well as including these things in their unit studies and integrating these into the curriculum. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Hopefully I'll do this okay. All right, let me find my presentation. Here we go. All right, I'm going to move myself over here a little bit. So I could no more talk about being culturally responsive without thinking about what is going on in the culture as we speak, what's going on in the national landscape, because again, this is part of the life journeys that some of us will do in the classroom. So what's going on in the culture? Well, we know this month, Juneteenth is now recognized as a federal holiday. And you guys to stop and think about that. Here we are, a nation of former slave owners and former who continue in many ways to live under legal, social, economic oppression even after the Emancipation Proclamation, and even to some degree, even after the Civil Rights Movement. And so now here we are acknowledging that this kind of enslavement did occur, and now we can now celebrate the announcement of the emancipation. So this is definitely a dividing moment in American history. And I just want to point out this woman right here. She is like in her 90s, and she was one of the just tireless, fearless leaders who really worked towards getting Juneteenth as a federal holiday. And so I can just imagine, as I look at her, I can just imagine in her 90 plus years what she has seen in terms of her life story and what this federal holiday means to her specifically. This is what Vice President Harris said. We are gathered here in a house built by enslaved people. And if we just pause right there and think about what that means. We are footsteps away from where President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. We have come far, but we do have a way to go. We have not reached that more perfect union that we are all continually striving for. But we're getting close, guys. But today is a day of celebration. It is not only a day of pride, it's also a day to reaffirm and rededicate ourselves to action. So that's what Vice President Harris said. But then there was a second thing that happened this month that's also cause for celebration. President Biden actually proclaimed June as National Immigrant Heritage Month. You know, again, acknowledging the role that immigrants play in the very fiber of what we might call American culture. And I just wanted to, again, read what, and I love this, by the way, and this is by no means meant to displace our American flag, but I saw this image and I thought that this, of course, this quote is from the Broadway musical Hamilton. And it's just, again, a way of stopping and understanding the role that immigrants play in the building of America. And so rather than looking at our American flag, our 50 states, these stars represent 50 nations that immigrants have come from. So, you know, using cultural icon of the American flag, and then also juxtapositioning that with today, I think is very apropos. But this is what President Biden wrote, and it just really does kind of go and speak to what his thinking was on that day. So this is the proclamation on National Immigrant Heritage Month. America is, always has been, and always will be a nation of immigrants. It was the premise of our founding, is reflected in our Constitution. It is etched upon the Statue of Liberty, that from her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. During National Immigrant Heritage Month, we affirm, and draw strength from that endearing. I celebrate the history and achievement of immigrant communities across our nation. There was a proclamation that, again, I'm gonna move this over to the screen here. There we go. That really did speak to why he felt like this was important and why this was, again, yet another defining moment in this ongoing journey of what it really means when we to live out our creed that all men really are created equal, and more importantly, our motto, e pluribus unum, out of many come one. All right, so it's from that conversation. And whenever I think about immigrants, I think about, again, I referenced it earlier, the Broadway musical Hamilton. We're gonna listen to just a few bars of it. I want you to notice that they are not on the Broadway stage, but they're actually at the White House, which is also kind of symbolic. But let's just listen and then we'll talk about it.
Placed him in charge of a trading charge. And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard up. Inside, he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter. Then a hurricane came, devastation reigned. A man saw his future dripping down the drain. The pencil to his temple connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, the testament to his he said, "This kid is insane, man. Took up a connection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man?" Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. There's a million things I haven't done. Just you.
Sorry. There. So yeah, we never want to stereotype or generalize or presume that we know everyone's story, but there are some common threads in the way that Alexander as the immigrant is portrayed by this musical Hamilton. So now that we've kind of set the stage, I hope we talked about the significance of these two really monumental additions to our diversity calendar. I think that now we're ready to talk about the goals for our remaining time together. So first, I want to talk about what does it mean to be a talent scout? And what does that have to do with what we're talking about? And then second, what happens when we have students that are from marginalized communities, our socioeconomic communities, or communities who are not coming in at the same levels of proficiency or exposure that some of our other gifted students are coming in? What do we do then? So you've been identified gifted, now what? And then after that, what is our long game? You know, we talk a lot about making sure that we are identifying students across the board. But again, because our conversation is focused on marginalized students, what is our long game for these students? And why is it important that we start as early as possible in terms of identification? What does that have to do with our long game? So those are our three goals. So I want to go back to this opening song from Hamilton, because I think that there are common threads in the story of the immigrant experience. So there's a section in this opening song where he says, "Then the word got out and they said, 'This kid is insane, man.' So they took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, but don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name." What's your name, man? So let's just examine this, because we're thinking in terms of what is a talent scout and how are educators talent scouts. So here was a young man. I mean, can you get any more degrading than to be identified as a bastard and the son of a whore? Can you get any lower than that? And yet, in the middle of his community, they saw something in him. They saw that he was different, so much so that they said, this kid is insanely smart. I mean, like scary smart. What are we going to do about it as his community? And remember, this is a time when no one really had much of anything singularly, but collectively they thought in terms of community, and they said, okay, we know that he cannot stay here. His talent is too big. He can't stay here. So what we're going to do is do what we can do. We cannot provide an opportunity for him here. So we're going to, each of us as we can, we're going to take up a collection and we're going to send him to the mainland. And then look at what their instructions were to him. They don't say, you know, go and find a community so that you can make a lot of money. They don't say go and just do whatever you can and figure it out along the way. No, they said find an education community. Get your education. Find a community that's going to support this talent. And then don't forget from whence you came. So we're sending you out because you have this enormous talent. We're giving you specific instructions. Get your education. Find the education community that's going to develop and support your talent. But at the same time, remember, you're taking culture with you. You're taking stories with you. You're taking your life experience with you. And those are things that we want to make sure that the education community also supports so that you won't forget where you come from. And then the last thing they said was, what is your name? What's your name? And you know, names are incredibly important. You know, that's one of the first things that parents get to do is name their kids, right? And in so many of our cultures, and so many of our cultural experiences, names are important. And so when a student comes in and he has a name that you can't pronounce or that you're not sure of, then we want to ask him, what is your name? And then we want to go further than that. Tell me about you. You know, there's an old African saying that says, when you meet someone, in our country, we say, you know, nice to meet you, good to know you, how are you? But in the African tradition, old African tradition, there's a tradition that says that when you meet someone, you look them in the eye and you say, I see you. I see you. I see you. And I see the relationship that maybe we could have, the potential. All right, so let's just sum up this idea of educators being talent scouts. So the first thing that in Hamilton's case, and in many cases, as immigrants are coming to this country, as we have to remember that our students very often are coming, there may be second, third generation coming from different cultures, but what's the first thing that we have to do as educators? We have to recognize that there's talent there, and the talent could be hidden, and it could be hidden deep, you know, underneath behavioral issues. It could be hidden deep under language barriers. It could be hidden deep under just socioeconomic. It could be headed, you know, buried deep under cultural norms. And so this is why building relationships with families is so important, so that we can kind of get an understanding. I remember I had a friend, and she was there was a student in her class, and he would never look at her, and she would call his name, and she would try to communicate, and he would just always say, yes, mom, yes, mom. And he would never look at her, but he was always very respectful, and she didn't quite understand why he was never making eye contact. So as we did further research, we found out that that was a sign of respect, is that you don't look at teacher. In his culture, you didn't look a teacher in the eye and have direct eye contact. That was a sign of respect. was for you to bow your head and say, yes, mom. Yes, mom. Right? So knowing those cultural norms is so important. And then realizing, again, as he's portrayed on Broadway, his community realized his town. They didn't say, wow, that guy's smart. This boy's insane. No, they said, we realize it and we're going to seize the opportunity to support him. So that's the next step. As educators, it's not enough to say, yeah, he's just really bright. He's got potential. No, we have to figure out how we can support him. And what does that mean? What does that look like for this kiddo who has potential, but who obviously needs some support? And then responding to the limitations and challenges. We do this as educators. Hamilton's community knew what their limitations were. They knew that they were going to have to go beyond, think creatively, think out of the box, redesign, recreate, rethink. What are we going to do with this talent? And then they decided, we're going to send him to the best place that's going to support and nurture his talent. And very often that really is what parents and teachers are saying when they are recommending students for gifted testing. We want to send him someplace. We want to place him in a position to be successful. And then finally, educators, we have to respect from whence they came. We have to respect from whence they came, for all families. But I think, again, as we're focusing on minority families and marginalized communities, whence they came is really important. And so the last thing we want to do is not to support their cultural traditions in the classroom. So if you know that you have someone in your class that is from a different culture, then the very last thing you want to do is suggest that, yeah, you can be here, but we're not going to really do anything in terms of integrating. We're not really going to do anything in terms of trying to research what your traditions are or what your faith tradition might be. But you're welcome to be here in our class. No. We want to always support from whence they came. We always want to remember to bring their culture and their tradition will allow them to bring those with them into the classroom. All right. And that brings me to my next thing. Race and identity, guys, is so important. It is critical in dealing with students and understanding this idea of bias and stereotype. So I'm going to play a quick video for you that I think just nails this idea of how important race and identity is. This is from Vocabulary, one of my most favorite websites to look at.
I bet you notice that there's all kinds of different people everywhere. Let's explore those differences. Yeah. When I was just a kid, I was really confused. Sometimes I kind of felt like I was breaking the rules. Because many of the kids who looked how I didn't really live the way that I lived. We both have brown skin and our hair it felt the same. But when we were at home, we were into different things. My mom and my dad came from another continent, so there were certain habits that for them were really hard to get. They made different foods and they spoke another language. At first, I felt embarrassed. People couldn't understand it. Now that I'm older, I've begun to see that everybody's different, even if they look like me and coming from another country. It's not a secret you should keep. Now I'm proud of all the things that make my family so unique. My friends know there are customs that I don't really share with them, but they understand no matter what, I'm still American. When I was first born, I didn't know about race. I wouldn't judge a person just by looking at their face. But as I grew older, kids started to ask me, hey, what are you? And then I started grasping. They wanted to know what group I belong to. Black, white, Hispanic, Nitty, what are you? When I was 10 years old, my family moved. I had to fill out a form at my new school. There was a list of races. It told me to pick one, but I panicked because I didn't really know which one. You see, my dad is black, but not Latina like my mother, so I guess I have to check the little box that says other. Some people say I have to choose between one and another, but it's not about what's on the outside, it's what's under. Making friends is deeper than the color of my skin, and I think what really matters is how we look within.
Wow. There's so much to unpack there, but I just want to touch on a couple of main things. And that is that sometimes we think, well, if you're all Black, then you all came from the same place, and so there isn't any difference, really, is there? Or aren't all East Indians East Indians? I mean, is there a difference between? Yes, yes. And so this idea of grouping folks together just because we are all, it is true that there may be some similarities in, for example, families from India, but there's a southern and a northern part. The traditions and cultures are totally different. And so we can't make those assumptions. And I love what she said about children who are biracial. Those are two separate cultures that have come together and form this incredible potential. And so we have to be really sensitive. Guys, there just, I'm gonna say it again, there simply is no space, room, time, energy for bias or stereotypes or generalizations. We have to make space for students to be who they are. All right, let's keep going. Having a diversity calendar would really help with this. So again, as we talked earlier, we just added 2 different events to our diversity calendar. So as educators, it's so important that we be aware of Juneteenth. And I know that it is a summer holiday that we celebrate, but in much the same way that we intertwine July 4th in our social studies, we've got to find a way to intertwine Juneteenth and integrate that into our culture during the year. The other thing that would help with that, this is another vocabulary. They do a great job with doing a weekly wrap, which also, again, this is all about making sure that you are aware of what's going on in the culture, right? So that you can then help your students also respond to what's going on in the culture. We're gonna skip that. So now that this little guy has been identified gifted, now what? So I had a student in my class last year who I knew that he was what in my school we call provisional. He wasn't exactly gifted, but his scores were high enough and we were trying to backfill the class. So we decided that Nicholas should try it. And so he walked into a gifted class having no idea of what to expect from a gifted class. And you know, by definition, gifted classes are accelerated and they're project-based and they are enriched and extended and all those things. And so it really does help if you have a reading level that will support what we're trying to do in class. Nicholas did not. He was reading at probably kindergarten level when he came into the class. And of course, that set him up to feel like I shouldn't be here. I'm the dumbest kid in the class, right? And so it was really working with him to get his academic skills up, but also working with him to get the social emotional support that he needed. That yes, you can do this. You're going to have to work hard, and we're going to find some ways to help you access this curriculum. But the thing about Nicholas was that his critical thinking was just phenomenal, and his ability to make connections and his ability to analyze and to do those depth of knowledge things, those skills were in place. He just was missing the reading. His math skills were strong. So even though he was identified gifted, he still needed some academic support, and he also needed some social and emotional support. And that's super important to realize that our students who are coming in, particularly students who have language barriers or who have socioeconomic issues, or in the case of Nicholas, his family just was not really prepared to be as a family to being gifted. They really didn't understand that over the summer, it would have been helpful if Nicholas had been reading, if he had done some more academic things. And so it was also just educating mom and dad and sending home resources and working with them to help them understand the potential that Nicholas had, and that I was all in with this kiddo. And you know, again, going back to being a talent scout, because the fact that Nicholas did not feel always that he was on the same playing field as some of the other students, he did, he did show some behavioral issues. And you know, behavior is a sign of communication, and I recognize that. And so we worked together to get his academics up. And at his May conference, you know, we've been talking all year about what families could be doing at home to help support Nicholas in the classroom. And we really kind of mapped out a summer plan for Nick, not anything like, you know, dogmatic or get in here, but just things that he could do to prepare him so that he would feel confident walking into a third grade gifted classroom. I want to talk lastly about this idea of the long game. You know, when a student is identified early and they're placed in and this is any student across the board, but again, our focus right now is on marginalized students and coming from marginalized communities and populations. But when a student is identified early, you say it again, early, and they're placed in a gifted class, I want you to think about what that means, the exposure that means, the access that means, and just the opportunities that student is going to experience just by being in a enriched, gifted, extended environment. Now, that's not to say that our gen ed teachers are not doing a great job, but students who are identified early have the advantage and the benefit of all of the things that they're. Just think about that. If a student is identified in kindergarten, what will his talent be like? What will the development, what will be the trajectory when he gets to like middle school, when he is now ready to walk into honors classes? And then what does that look like when he is now in high school? And because of the academic rigor and exposure that he's had up to this point, he is now ready to do what? Walk into AP classes. And then what does that mean in terms of, now we don't know at this point what the SAT is going to look like, but what does that mean in terms of college admittance? What's our long game here? Because this is what we know. We know that students who are identified early, not always, again, we don't want to stereotype and generalize, but certainly they're in a position to be able to continue to access and to continue to have opportunity and to continue to have their skills and talents developed such that they're much more prepared to walk into whatever they intend to do in life. And let's just think in terms of higher education. Let's think in terms of college. So what is our long game? And what does that mean? So this is the long game. Investment equals reinvestment. You do realize that students who leave our K-12 gifted programs and who are going to college will then reinvest back into our community. You realize that, right? So there is this long-term thing that if we invest early, then it's very likely that these students will reinvest in their community in some either academic or professional manner. And then I want to say that thinking about the long game, diversity and tapestry in classrooms enriches the entire class community. The entire class gets to grow when we focus on race and identity, and we support and celebrate diversity, and not just to say, yeah, we support diversity, but we really are intentional and purposeful about integrating into our curriculum and integrating into what we want class communities to look like. And then finally, education is preparation, again, across the board. But we are preparing these students to do something with the talent. I go back to Hamilton. Get your education. Get your education. Do what it is that, find your purpose. And then don't forget where you came from. My wanted to talk really quickly about cultural competency. Guys, this is really important as we develop cultural responsiveness in our classroom. What we're doing is developing cultural competency in our students and giving them that opportunity to develop those skills. And so let's look at what cultural competency encompasses. Number one, it's an awareness of one's own cultural worldview. And then an attitude towards cultural differences. And this is, again, part of what we do when we're culturally responsive is bringing culture into looking at what's going on in the culture, but also helping students develop their attitude and their respect towards cultural differences. And then also knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews. This is where understanding what is Juneteenth? What does it mean? When do we celebrate it? Those cultural competencies and cross-cultural skills, and then and the cross-cultural skills. So this is what we're doing. This is what we're talking about when we are talking about developing cultural responsive teaching. We're really thinking about cultural competencies. And then finally, so my youngest starts at Princeton, and she's gifted. And we love so many things about Princeton, just so many things. But the one thing that we love about Princeton is their position on the humanities and on cultural diversity. So this is their statement. Scholarship in the humanities forms and deepens us as individuals and as contributions to society. At a time when technology offers dazzling new possibilities and cultures in ways both exciting and dangerous, the arts and humanities provide crucial insight into what matters in life, into the character of a civilization. When a nation will say, we're going to acknowledge Juneteenth, that says something about the nation's character. And into the capacity and of a people's ability to understand societies different from their own. So again, what is our long game? For some students, it will be pursuing academic college, post-graduation. And this, we want them ready for this. We want them ready for Princeton. And even if it's not Princeton, for some level of college. And the way that we do that, the way that we prepare them in the humanities, and we prepare them is to be culturally responsive from the time that they're pre-K and they enter our K-12 system. That's really all I have, you guys. I mean, I could talk all night, but that's really all I have. And I just want to turn it back to Donna. And if we have time, maybe take some questions or comments.
We absolutely will take some questions and comments. I was especially intrigued by your example of Nicholas. And I think that we all have experienced the social and emotional toll that it takes on students who are not validated for their gifts and their talents. Can you speak a little bit more about that social and emotional piece and how they're affected?
Absolutely. And, Nicholas is just one of many examples that I've seen of a student who comes in to gifted, and has the potential. Guys, he has the potential, but he just, with Nicholas, part of the social emotional piece with him was teaching him how to be a student. He wasn't real sure what that looked like. Just, smart, and like I said, his critical thinking skills were so well developed for a young guy who really had not had a lot of exposure in critical thinking. But we'd be talking about this, and he would raise his hand and say, Miss Johnson, that really reminds me of when we were talking about this. Mm-hmm. And he brought so much of his life experience. He understood how important his life experience was. And he looked to me to validate that life experience. I remember one time we were working on perspective, and we were looking at a young man who was decorated in sort of a tribal kind of way, and we were trying to figure out, why would he work? He looks different, Miss Johnson. And so we were working through that, and it was Nicholas that said, Miss Johnson, I had my first communion this weekend. And I said, I remember that, Nicholas. I remember you invited me. He said, yeah, and it was awesome. But my mom said I had to have a haircut, and I had to buy a new suit. So maybe he's dressed like this because it's a special occasion. Maybe it's a time that's he's not going to be able to do again. You only have one first communion, Miss Johnson. And so because of that, maybe there's special, just like my mom said, I had to wear a new suit and get a haircut. Maybe there's something going on with him on this day. And I was like, exactly. Yeah. But he was able to make those connections, even though his reading level was way low, way low. And so he would get very frustrated. And when he got frustrated, then, that kind of manifested itself in behaviors. So we had to work through that. I very often would sit with him after school, before his parents would pick him up, and we would work on his reading, and we would work on assignments, because sometimes he would say, you know what, I think I can get it. It's just like you're just moving too fast. And I'd say, okay, all right. So then that tells me we need to slow it down. So maybe you need to come see me. And so we just really built a relationship around this idea that, Nicholas, I am not going to look at your challenges before I look at your talent. I'm just not. So yeah, that's a really important piece, particularly as we're thinking about students who are coming in, maybe that are ELL, and whatever socioeconomic backgrounds that they come from. So many of these students, I was talking to a friend of mine who teaches in the Balts district, and she was saying that they have a huge population of Somalian refugees. So you can imagine, mom and dad are struggling, trying to figure out this whole thing. And now, but what did they do? They send them to school so that we can partner and we can be that extended community.
Exactly. Thank you very much. It reminds me that sometimes it's through behavior that we see kids, raising their hand and saying, look at me, see me, I'm here, and I need something different. I need challenge. And I think that behavior is misinterpreted way too often. And it often keeps, our gifted kids out of programs. We do know in our state, we are doing a good job now of finding ways to cast a wider net, of being able to, as you were talking about, develop talent without needing to have that label gifted, and that a child needing to be gifted in all things. And that also ways that we can fill in the gaps. I see that Elizabeth Warner is with us today. And I'm wondering if Elizabeth would like to share a little bit about what you're doing in Paradise Valley to cast a wider net, to be able to develop talents, and not worrying so much about this gifted label. Elizabeth, are you willing to do that? Can I put you on the spot?
Sure. I have to find a spot to be because I'm in my husband's office. So yeah, we're actually something that's new that we're starting this year is the new NNAT exam. That was so kind of in that realm, we're hoping that we can identify more students through that nonverbal exam that's coming out, the NAT with from Jack Dagliera. But as far as casting a wider net, we are actually, we have a lot of students who are flexed into content replacement programming, and we norm that by the building, not necessarily across the district. Do we have the same, by site norms, we can flex students in based on that opportunity. So you kind of caught me here, Donna. What?
That's all right. This is good because I know that you're doing some good things there. So I appreciate that because we know that, using a test is not a one and done for identifying our gifted kids. We have to look at them, we have to see them. And as Alisa has so brilliantly expressed, we need to seek out those talents. How about Janessa or Camille, who are on with us today? Do you have ideas that are going on in your classrooms or your district or your schools to be able to identify and make sure that we find those kids who are falling through the cracks? Either one of you, would you like to share?
Hi, Janessa. Sorry.
Camille.
Yes, I'm here. I've always had a problem with just administering a test and just saying a kid is gifted without anything else, any other kind of information to support what's happening. And sometimes too, um, you know, teachers, once a test is administered and the kid is labeled as gifted, it almost like there's a switch that turns on that says, okay, well, now you're supposed to be able to do this, you're supposed to be able to do that. The teachers never, they're never ever trained or never ever given the opportunity to look at an instrument that is used to test kids for giftedness. And so some teachers have no idea what it looks like. So even if they see it in their class, there is nothing to say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And then the idea that just a test, that just testing kids without any kind of alternative, measures, being, observing the kid over time. And so it really, really is concerning for me. Those areas are concerning for me. And I wish that there was something that we could do just to kind of get everybody on board. So we know we're testing the kids. This is what we're looking for. This is what you should look for. And, just making sure that we're engaging all parties in just this pursuit.
Yeah.
Alisa, do you have some response for her?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what you said is so true, Camille, that, it's like you don't look gifted or you're not acting like, you're gifted. And so, just being able to leave the like Donna said, the label of giftedness and just seek the talent. I think, and I do think that in your district that there should be more in terms of identifying gifted and knowing what that looks like. Elizabeth, do you want to talk more about that too? But you need to unmute.
I just was going to add that, for years we've used the KOI from Bertie Kingor. She's a great book. It's an oldie but a goodie of having the KOI inventory. And I used to give that in a plastic sheet with a whiteboard marker to teachers and ask, just keep this over time, keep some tally marks. Maybe this is, and especially, for our staffing purposes, we always empower our gifted specialists to look at their cluster team as the farm team and to really look deep into that talent pool and to look at not just to populate our program, but to meet the needs of those students. There's a newer book out, I'm drawing a blank, but it's from built on the 4 tenets of NAGC, which is the see me, hear me, or see me, understand me. And there's some great resources in there. One that, works well with the cluster handbook where a teacher could look at, there's a form in there that talks about, are you doing these things in your classroom? An observation for the teacher, but then an observation to look at the student through the lens of, through their talents and their strengths. And I think being proactive and being a leader in your building, helping to see that amongst, early learners, but also in, many times I've had kids that have come into gifted in grades 5, 6, and they've been missed for so long. and have
Yeah.
missed those opportunities. And it's just till they hit that right teacher who sees something different in them.
That, and that's what that was kind of my thinking with my friend Nicholas, is that at some point he is going to test gifted once he kind of gets the idea of what it means to be a student, and he learns to really read critically. Not that you have to read critically on a COGAT, but those studies or those observation skills, and he gets a little bit more self-discipline, then I do think that he's going to test gifted. But in the meantime, we still need to support him until he gets to that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to always remember that there's so many profiles of the gifted student.
Mm-hmm.
In so many different lenses. We need to examine those students and provide the opportunity.
Yeah.
So, and remembering that testing is one measure, and some students, depending on the situation or depending on, you know, the person administering the test, everyone's going to respond differently to that. So
Absolutely. And we do know, you know, some of our tests do tend to, I mean, there isn't one really good test that's, you know, comprehensive for absolutely everybody. And I remember when I was in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was observing a teacher in her classroom, and she had several of the Somali students that you were talking about that are now in Ball's district. And the most difficult thing for her was the young men had difficulty even being in the same class as girls.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were many roadblocks that she had to jump over. But I remember her saying to me, you know, there's just something about that kid.
Mm-hmm.
He can't speak our language,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about, but I can give him math and manipulatives and he knows what to do.
Exactly.
And I think that
Exactly.
is recognizing talent, you know, and that's what we're looking for.
And I think that, you know, I go back to my example of Hamilton. He said, go get your education. They said, go get your education, go find a community that's going to support you. And we have to be that extended community, which means that we have to not only be invested in the student, but we do have to reach out to the families. And we do have to do a bit of research to figure out why does he have his head down? Why does he never look me in the eye?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And those sort of cultural norms that we may not, you know, we might be thinking, what's up with that?
Mm-hmm. I'm actually thinking about some new Informed series episodes now as a result of this conversation. And I think that would be a very good one, you know, to learn to recognize the nuances in different cultures. And sometimes, you know, just giving kids to express that themselves. You know, what do you celebrate on this holiday? How do you celebrate this holiday? You know, those kinds of things are shareable moments that validate who the kids are.
So one of the things that we're going to be doing when the kids come back in is we're going to leapfrog off of National Immigration Month now, and we're going to do those kind of family sort of heritage kind of things. Tell me, are there any of you who your family, even 3 or 4 generations removed, but you know they were immigrants that came to this country, and so those are ways that we can use what's going on in the culture in terms of diversity calendar in our classrooms.
Very good. Thank you. I want to thank you, Alisa, for sharing your story,
Absolutely.
for sharing the
Always my
knowledge that you
pleasure.
have with us. Thank you to everyone who joined us. This will be recorded and available to other people who I'm sure Heather has told me there's several people that always look at our series after the day that it's recorded. Do we have a couple things, Heather, we need to share?
Oh, you need to unmute.
I'm having technical difficulties today, so I'm so sorry. But yes, first and foremost, we have our survey link that will allow for you to get your professional development certificate today. So it's at bit.ly at AAGT Informed Survey 14. That is case sensitive. And just want to throw out there that to save the date for our upcoming Parent Institute, which is September 25th, and part of a lot of this education that we need to do to move forward with equity and the gifted education for these, like as talent scouts, is making sure that the parents of these students are educated. And so just inviting them to our Parent Institute so that they can connect with other parents that are in
So
the same
important.
situation, and learn from each other and learn from our speakers that will be joining us that day. So mark your calendars, September 25th, and we will be providing flyers so that you can invite the parents of your students. So I think that's it.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good summer. Look for the next Inform Series episode coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you.